Singapore is one of the most efficient, disciplined, and successful countries on earth, but ask a Singaporean how many people truly know them. Not colleagues, not neighbors, not the friends they see at weddings, people who actually know the real version of them, and watch what happens when they try to answer. Today we are counting down 7 reasons why, with complete respect, because what the answer reveals about Singapore says something the rest of the world genuinely needs to hear. Stay until number 1. It reframes everything that comes before it. In Singapore, the conversation about your child's future starts before the child can understand what a future is. The PSLE, the primary school leaving examination, determines which secondary school a child attends at 12, which school shapes which social group, which group shapes the next decade. The pressure is not quiet, it is everywhere, in the tuition centers that fill up every weekend, in the way children learn very early that what you score matters more than who you are. Singapore's education system produced one of the most skilled workforces on earth, but it also produced something nobody planned. A generation of children who learned to compete before they learned to connect, and the competition never really stopped. That says a lot about how deeply the pattern runs. The friendships that should have formed freely in childhood were quietly replaced by a drive to be better and faster that followed Singaporeans all the way into adulthood. You might think that changes once school is over. It does not, because number 6 is the cultural mindset that education installed, one that makes genuine vulnerability feel like a risk no rational person would take. Kiasu is a Hokkien word that Singaporeans use so naturally it barely registers as unusual. It means the fear of losing out. And it describes something so fundamental to Singaporean culture that it shapes decisions people make without even realizing it. In a country where academic rank, career position, and material success are public measures of worth, showing weakness to another person carries genuine risk. Real friendship requires vulnerability, saying, I am struggling, I am afraid, I do not have it figured out. And in a culture organized around not losing, that kind of honesty feels dangerously close to admitting defeat. So Singaporeans become skilled at surface, close enough to call someone a friend, far enough that nobody ever sees the part that is not winning. That is not coldness. It is self-protection built over decades. The fact that an entire culture needed a specific word for this feeling says everything about what connection costs in Singapore. Vulnerability is not weakness, but in Singapore, it can feel exactly like it. Here is where it gets interesting, because number 5 is not about what Singaporeans choose. It is about what the system leaves them with at the end of every single day, and there is almost nothing left. Singapore consistently ranks among the countries with the longest working hours in the world, not because Singaporeans are workaholics by nature, but because the culture built around survival and success created a workplace where leaving on time can feel like a statement and not a positive one. What genuine friendship needs above everything else is time, not the kind you schedule 3 weeks in advance, the kind where you can call someone on a Tuesday evening because something is wrong. That kind of availability requires space in a life, and Singapore's work culture fills that space completely. By the time most Singaporeans finish the day, they have given everything that was asked of them. What is left for depth is almost nothing. A country that became a global economic powerhouse did it on the same fuel that makes deep friendship almost impossible to sustain: time. And in Singapore, time is the one thing nobody has enough of. But number 4 is the one that surprises people most, because it is not about what happens at work. It is about what happens at home in a country where millions of people live within meters of each other and have never had a real conversation. Over 80% of Singaporeans live in HDB flats, public housing estates designed and built by the government. They are extraordinarily well planned, clean, connected, efficient, everything a resident needs within walking distance. What they were not designed for is community. The corridors are quiet, the lift rides are silent, neighbors live 2 meters apart, separated by a single wall, and sometimes have not exchanged a word in years. Singapore made proximity so efficient and self-contained that there is genuinely no friction that forces people to interact, no shared space that requires negotiation, no reason to knock on a door, and without a reason, most people never do. The fact that you can live beside someone for a decade and know nothing about them says a lot about what Singapore optimized for. Efficiency and convenience are not the same thing as connection. Singapore gave people both and quietly removed the reason to reach for anything more. This is the one that hits Singaporean men differently, because number 3 targets the exact window in life when the deepest friendships are supposed to form, and it does it deliberately. At 18, just as most young Singaporean men are beginning to understand who they are and who they want around them, they enter national service. 2 years of structured military or civil life away from the social environment they spent their entire education building. The friendships that form in NS are real. The shared hardship, the humor that only survives genuinely difficult conditions, those bonds are genuine, but they form under extreme pressure, and when NS ends, those men scatter. University, work, different paths. The intensity that created the bond disappears, and most of those friendships quietly thin out without anyone deciding to end them. Psychology consistently identifies 18 to 22 as the window when the deepest adult friendships form. Singapore interrupts that window deliberately for an entire generation. The fact that national service bonds are so intense and yet so few of them last says something specific about what connection needs to survive. It needs the ordinary. NS provides the extraordinary and then removes it entirely, and this is where it all becomes internal, because number 2 is not about systems or schedules. It is about something Singapore built into the culture so deeply that most Singaporeans carry it without knowing it is there. In Singapore, what you have accomplished is visible. Your school, your degree, your job title, your address. These are the things that get discussed. What you feel is private, intensely private. There is no cultural framework in Singapore for sitting with a friend and saying, I am not okay. Generations of Singaporeans absorb the message that feelings are something you manage quietly, that asking for help is an imposition, that the appropriate response to difficulty is to work harder and say less. This creates a particular kind of loneliness, not the kind that comes from having nobody around, the kind that comes from being surrounded by people who know your resume and have never once asked how you actually are. You could be struggling completely and nobody would know, because you were trained to make sure they do not. A culture that celebrates what you build but has no language for how you feel produces people who are extraordinarily capable and quietly unreachable. And the saddest part is that most of them do not even realize they have closed a door that was never meant to stay shut. Number 1 is not a problem. It is the most unexpected thing about everything you have just heard. And once you understand it, you are going to see Singapore and the people who come from it in a completely different way. Think about what it takes to become close to a Singaporean. You have to get past a childhood built on competition, past a cultural reflex that treats vulnerability like a liability, past a work schedule that leaves almost nothing for depth, past a housing system that never required them to reach out, past the disruption of national service at exactly the wrong time, past a culture that rewarded achievement and kept feelings private for their entire life, and then someone still let you in. That is not casual. When a Singaporean calls you a close friend, they chose you specifically against every system they were raised in. That friendship will not be loud, it will not be performed, but it will show up consistently, without drama. When everything else in their life is competing for attention, they still find a way. Not because they have time, but because they decided you were worth making time for. The fact that Singaporeans form so few deep friendships is not a flaw. It is a measure. When someone from a culture built on efficiency, competition, and emotional privacy decides you are worth their trust, that says everything, not just about them, but about what they see in you. So here's my question. If you are Singaporean, or if you grew up somewhere that sounds like what you just heard, which one of these 7 hit you in a way you were not expecting? Was it number 6, recognizing that what you always called being private was actually self-protection installed before you were old enough to question it? Or was it number 1, understanding for the first time why the few close friendships you have feel so different from every other relationship in your life? Drop it in the comments. And if a Singaporean came to mind while you were watching this, someone who has quietly shown up for you without ever making a big deal of it, go tell them what that means tonight. One question before you go: does the most loyal person in your life know how much you actually value them? Go tell them right now. Subscribe because next week we are going even deeper into the psychology of connection. I will see you in the next one.